few more joining. Great, welcome everyone. I think this is our fourth class on Essential Nectar. Let's go ahead and start as we usually do with just a few prayers, and then we will do a short meditation. So again, we're just going to recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once, even though it says 3 times, just to save a little bit of time. But recall the amazing qualities of the Buddha, who through his compassion, kindness, and wisdom, gave us these incredible teachings that we're following in this text. So let's bring those qualities to mind as we make this praise to the Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge in bodhicitta, and as we usually do, we'll recite it first time in English, and then 2 more times chanting the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyan gi pe sanam gi drola panchir sangye drupar sho Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki chanyan gi pe sanam gi dola panchir sangye drupar shok. Okay, let's do a short meditation, and we'll spend just the first few minutes focusing on the breath in order to calm the mind a bit and let go of whatever distractions we might have. And then I'll come in and I'll lead you in a short reflection to set motivation. So again, work with the breath, whatever way you prefer, and we'll do this in silence for the next couple minutes. So now to set our motivation for tonight, let's recall the two teachings that we've already examined in the Lamrim in this text, Essential Nectar. These are the first two kind of foundational topics of the Lamrim, and they can inspire us greatly when we reflect on them. First of all, to consider the fact that we have a relationship with spiritual guides, whether we have someone we call a guru or not. We have those beings who have compassion for us and who have provided teachings to us. Beings such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe, many other teachers who have provided the Dharma for us, as well as, of course, all the great figures of the lineages, all going all the way back to Shakyamuni Buddha. We are benefiting from the wisdom and compassion of all of these amazing beings. And we should feel incredibly blessed that we live at a time when these teachings are here for us to partake of, to investigate, and eventually to realize. So this is unbelievable good fortune that we are under the guidance of these amazing spiritual masters. But from our side, we have also created the causes for this perfect human rebirth, sort of vessel that we can use to cross to the other shore, to do whatever we can to proceed on a spiritual path. As we examined last week, we have great freedom in this human rebirth, free from the inopportune situations that would have thwarted our spiritual practice. And moreover, we are endowed with amazing qualities, not just having this human body, but having some faith in the Dharma and complete faculties to be able to investigate the teachings and to be born at a time when the teachings are still being practiced. And there are many beings who can support us on this path. We have created this from our side. Through our own past actions, we now have this perfect human opportunity. So these two topics should inspire us greatly, make us feel like we are rich beyond belief. And of course, what do we do with this richness? It's important that we use this human life and having met with the Dharma for the best possible goal. Not just to gain a good rebirth, though that is certainly a part of our path. Not just to attain our own liberation, though that too is something we need to want for ourselves. But mainly, primarily, to attain complete enlightenment, Buddhahood, a state where we then can help other beings perfectly, can guide them with that perfect knowledge of their minds. So this is the motivation of bodhicitta that we want to bring to these teachings tonight. The wish to develop ourselves all the way to our fullest potential of Buddhahood, so we then can benefit all sentient beings. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. Okay, so we are in the beginning of what are called the three scopes. Sometimes this term, again, is not Rinpoche's favorite. He talks about it in terms of three levels of capacity, capability. So we're about to enter into the first of these, the least capable being, the person who has the lowest capacity of the three. But I did want to share just a little bit in terms of a transition from the previous topic. These, again, sort of basics or foundational teachings of Guru devotion and the opportune, fortunate rebirth that we just meditated on those two, that we have the good fortune of both of those in our lives, this human existence that is rich in opportunity, as well as having met with the gurus, the teachers, again, regardless of whether we have someone who we consider to be that being. But I wanted to share a verse. While I'm here on retreat, I've been listening to some of Rinpoche's teachings that he recorded during the pandemic when we were all sort of, at home. I didn't get a chance to listen to many of them then because I was quite busy, but he quoted Acharya Chandra Gomin in a text called Letter to a Disciple, in a teaching that I listened to just the other day called Do Your Best in This Life. And it says, having received this perfect human rebirth, you can reach the end of the oceans of rebirth and plant the seeds of virtue of supreme enlightenment. Who would not want the results of a human body, which has even greater qualities than a wish granting jewel? So, again, this is what we are talking about now in terms of the remainder of this text, essentially. In some Lamrim texts, they actually even set up Guru devotion as kind of a standalone topic, and then they introduce the topic of a perfect human rebirth. And the very next kind of offshoot of that is how to use this perfect human rebirth. And that's where we get into the three scopes, the three levels of practice, because of course we can attain all three of these with this life. Uh, get a good rebirth like this one or better even. We can also attain liberation from our own cycle of existence, our own samsara. And moreover, we can attain enlightenment or at least proceed to some degree on our path to attaining enlightenment. So this is what we are kind of looking at. Well, we've got this human body that has even greater qualities than this mythical wish granting jewel. Wish granting jewel is said to be able to grant any of the wishes that we want in terms of material things and things in this world and what have you. But this body, you can attain things beyond this world. You can attain liberation and enlightenment, as is mentioned in the first two lines. So this is more precious, greater than having seas of wish granting jewels, much less, just a single one. All of those wish granting jewels can't do anything for you but bring you happiness in this life. And we're talking about happiness that goes so much further beyond that. So again, we're going to look then at the three levels. And before I get into these, I do want to mention that the first two, even though I don't have it on the slide, they're often talked about the paths that are in common with those beings. Because again, we are approaching these three levels from the perspective of someone who wants to become a Buddha, through the motivation of bodhicitta, so that we are actually looking from the point of view of we have to traverse through these, but we don't stop at those. That's not our main goal. So again, these three levels, we often use, Venerable Rabin often uses the analogy of our education system, right? Where we have elementary school, high school, and university level. Our goal is to get through university level. Our goal is to get to Buddhahood, but we have to traverse through the other two. We have to develop the same level of interest, understanding, realization, motivation that are a part of those, but we don't stop there. We are always doing everything with the third level motivation, the motivation of bodhicitta. So that's why the first two are often talked about as the path in common with the person of inferior capacity, the path in common with the person of middling capacity. Because people who use the Buddha's teachings solely for those reasons would be practicing the same things. But we're not going to stop there. We are going to continue on to the third level, to the highest level of practice. And that's the whole idea behind this Lam-Rim approach. It's from the perspective of the greatest goal, the goal of complete enlightenment. So we have just under 100 verses for this path of the inferior person, the person of least capacity, as we would sometimes call it. This is divided into two main parts. The first two are where we generate an attitude of concern for our future lives. And that is done through, first of all, recollecting death and impermanence. While we do have this perfect human rebirth, it's not going to last forever. And we have to be conscious of that and aware of the uncertainty of our death in order to make sure we use this life well while we have it. Then the second topic there is, of course, contemplating what will happen after our death. What will our future be in terms of if we were to end up in the unfortunate states, the three lower realms? So that's a little bit of a tough teaching. We may get into that a little bit tonight, but nonetheless, it's one that we do have to examine to generate this concern for what comes after this life when this life comes to an end. Then, of course, the answer to that question, to having that concern, is the next topic, relying on the means to then gain happiness in future lives, which involves taking refuge And then on the basis of refuge, primarily taking refuge in the teachings on karma, the law of cause and effect, and developing some conviction in that, because that is the answer to the dilemma that we find at this first level of the path. Now, again, even though those two are presented, I'll talk about this again when we get to those two topics of refuge and karma. Even though they're presented here at the first level, those two topics are something that go on beyond this first level and something that does inform our practice at all three levels, deepening our refuge in the three jewels, and generating even greater conviction in karma in terms of how we attain the results that we are seeking. So I'm going to share from another teaching I watched while I was here on retreat called How to Avoid Wasting Your Life. And there's a few slides from this that I want to share and talk a little bit about the 8 worldly dharmas or worldly concerns. It says here, Rinpoche said, so you need to meditate very regularly and strongly on impermanence, death. This is how he refers to this topic that we're going to go into tonight, the first one of the person of the inferior capacity. Then you can change your mind. Otherwise, even if you become very learned in Dharma, attachment and the 8 worldly dharmas, the worldly concerns, are still there. Even if you become big, very big, you become learned in Sutra and Tantra, wah, in this and that, wah, his Rinpoche would say. You have so many disciples, wah, but it becomes so big, your worldly concern. What he's pointing out here are what are called, again, the 8 worldly concerns. And this is often taught in, well, is taught in some Lamrim texts as a transition from perfect human rebirth into the topic of death and impermanence. We don't have it in our text. So I'm giving you a little bit of additional teaching on this topic tonight. But many of you have encountered these before, and Rinpoche has written a whole book called How to Practice Dharma that is all about the 8 worldly concerns. We can get trapped in this human life pursuing these 8 worldly concerns. And they are worldly, they're mundane, they are only about attachment to this life. They're only about doing what we can to have well being, to avoid misfortune in this life. And by virtue of that, they become a waste of our time and a waste of this perfect human rebirth. So let's look at these 8. These are, again, often set out in terms of all of them being cravings or attachment. The first one being, and there are 4 pairs essentially. The first pair being craving for material possessions, for gain, and then craving to be free from loss, from a lack of material possessions. We can see how this plays a role in our lives to some extent, buying things, accumulating things, not wanting to lose them, being very upset when we lose money or pay too much for something or whatever the case might be. We can become very preoccupied with owning things, having possessions, and wanting to make sure that we protect them. And people who have many possessions, of course, become even more neurotic and worried about loss and the potential for those material possessions disappearing. The next pair is craving for happiness and comfort, and craving to be free from unhappiness and discomfort. Now, again, what we talk about here is this is the sort of conditional happiness that we are going after. Dharma happiness isn't a problem. If we spend our whole life desiring Dharma practice or Dharma happiness, that's no problem, because that's pursuing the teachings that will lead to more ultimate, lasting happiness. Here we're talking about mundane happiness, which comes from comfort, from having the things that we like in our lives and being comfortable. So the first one was about more about the things. Here it's about like the situations, and we always want to be comfortable. This is one that I think is really very powerful in our lives. It's kind of the Goldilocks syndrome, right? We want everything just right. We go into the Three Bears house and we aren't satisfied until we find the soup at the right temperature and the bed that's soft exactly the way we want it. And we're like this in our lives, right? Always being drawn towards those things that are kind of producing that feeling of comfort, happiness, satisfaction, and being kind of opposed to anything that disturbs that. The example I often point out here is that I would challenge if there's any of us, if you're traveling alone on a plane, that you reserve ahead of time the middle seat, right? It just doesn't happen, right? We don't crave the middle seat, right? Nobody really wants to sit there. If you're traveling with another person, then obviously one of you has to sit there generally because you've got 3 seats on either side, so one of you has to be in the middle seat. But nobody books it ahead of time for themselves because we don't like the discomfort of the middle seat, kind of sitting between 2 people and having to keep our arms together. It's not a very comfortable situation. And then when, if you will fly Southwest and you end up getting stuck with the middle seat because you're the last boarding section, well, then, you have to deal with it. But the reality is that we are drawn towards what is comfortable, what is pleasing for us. And this is a big one. Again, I think Venerable Rabina told me once that this was a big one for her still. She would always, I remember when she was drinking coffee, she used to make sure the coffee was served at a particular temperature and what have you. And so I don't know if she was doing that to kind of test the people that were behind the counter. But anyway, that's for Venerable Rabina to speak about. The third pair, craving for a good reputation and craving to be free from ill repute, from a bad reputation. Again, not all of us are as preoccupied with every one of these pairs, but for many people, this makes a lot of difference, right? If they're thought of highly in their community, in the groups in which they belong, what have you, that's really wonderful. And if you get a bad reputation there, it can be crushing. And of course, we have strong attachment to that and wanting to make sure that we please everyone so that they continue to have think well of us and have that good reputation. This is another thing Venerable Rabina often talks about is how people get to be people pleasers. And that's how they often live their lives, is trying to make sure that everyone around them thinks good of them. And that's, of course, just attachment to our own reputation. The last pair is a little similar, but it's not as large in terms of its scope. This is about the individuals generally who are praising us or criticizing us. We crave the praise. We want people to say wonderful things about us. Oh, you did such a good job. Oh, you're such a sweet person. You're so kind. You're so generous, blah, 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 blah. And we don't want to be criticized. There's that old slogan about if you have 10 people that talk about you and nine say something good about you, but one says something that's bad, you can only think about that one person and being criticized in that way, even though nine other people are saying something completely different. But we shouldn't be attached to either one, not getting the criticism or getting the praise. These again are worldly concerns. What does it matter whether someone praises you or criticizes you? Again, with these last few, reputation and praising and what have you, it is important that we do what we can to be a benefit to others so that we're not just being kind of haphazard in our actions and what we do so that everyone is thinking poorly of us and we're only the object of scorn and ridicule or what have you. I mean, we do have to have compassionate kind of place in the world. But here we're talking about the attachment to getting those things, the attachment to having a good reputation and so on. And that's, of course, where it becomes problematic because, as I said, we can put a lot of energy into all of, avoiding the four that are the bad side of it and getting the four that are the good side of it. And this is how we spend our lives. Again, if you want more information on this, Rinpoche's book called How to Practice Dharma is a wonderful way to examine these because they are really the starting point of our Dharma practice. Until we let go of our attachment to this life, we aren't even really practicing Dharma. Lama Zopa's book, The Door to Satisfaction, talks about his own revelation when he came to see that he hadn't even been practicing Dharma up to that point, when he, examined these eight worldly concerns. So Rinpoche continues, having mentioned that that's one of the problems, is that if we don't recall impermanence and death, we will waste this life with worldly concerns. Impermanence, strong every day, then it can, the more you meditate, then you can defeat your enemy, attachment, worldly concern. Not that it defeats you, right? We can't be defeated by our attachment. We need to defeat our attachment and actually engage in full-hearted practice. It has been defeating you from beginningless rebirths, Rinpoche says. It has been using you, defeating you from beginningless rebirths. Maybe I said it too fast for you to hear. From beginningless rebirths. This is just Rinpoche emphasizing that we have had this problem of the eight worldly dharmas, these eight worldly concerns, since beginningless time. It is not just from this morning, from this life, but from beginningless rebirths. So now you see that impermanence meditation is so important, so important, so important. Many people think this is for beginners. It is a beginner meditation. We meditate on bodhicitta, emptiness, something tantra, zokrim, which is the perfection stage, I'm sorry, completion stage of the Tantra, Dzogchen, which is the great perfection, another meditation practice often used in the Nyingma tradition. Rinpoche says, haha, many people think like that. Impermanence is something for the garbage. It is for beginners, haha. I was really touched by this when I encountered these teachings on my retreat here. It says, then what happens if you don't meditate on impermanence, even if you become so learned in Sutra and Tantra? But what happens to your mind is no realizations, nothing. Then the delusions, attachment is so strong, also anger, a jealous mind, self cherishing thought are so strong, like mountains, like an iron mountain, huge like Mount Meru. Okay, haha. So this is what he's essentially telling us is that, if we don't recall death and impermanence, and if we don't recall it frequently, so that it actually is like putting a burner under our butts so that we get on the cushion and do whatever we can to practice Dharma, well, then we're going to waste this life. We're going to end up spending this life preoccupied with these worldly concerns. Look at how much of our life has already been consumed with them, wanting to make sure that we have everything just right and get everything that we need to live a, quote, happy life. And in worldly terms, that is how most people approach their lives. They want to live their lives as comfortably, as well off as they can, and avoid any misfortune, any suffering, any difficulty. This isn't the path that we're on. We're looking beyond this to more lasting happiness and well-being. Again, the happiness of Dharma, as Rinpoche would often refer to it. You can attain deeper states of well-being. First, we have to, of course, get a good rebirth. That's the first step of the stages of the path, is to make sure that we can continue to have opportunities like this one. But we have to strive and desire to attain more lasting results. Again, we talked about these previously, what we would call certain goodness, definite goodness. This also is not mentioned in our text, but it's often in the Lam Rim teachings. I'm just going to touch on these extremely briefly. But usually this is what I call these Buddhist advertising. Before we even get into the meditation on death, the death awareness meditation, it's important to get kind of the understanding of what would be the faults if we didn't do this meditation. If we, look at it as beginner's meditation, as Rinpoche said, and just kind of avoid it and go right for the more heavy duty practices and meditations. And then, of course, we'll look at the advantages if we take this to heart and actually do recall death and meditate on it frequently. So for the faults, first, you don't remember to practice the Dharma, right? That's the last thing on your mind because you're not thinking about the fact that this life is going to come to an end. So you just keep doing what you're doing. Secondly, even if by chance you do remember, you'll still postpone your Dharma practice, thinking, oh, well, but still, death is not going to come anytime soon. And of course, part of the death awareness meditation is that it's absolutely uncertain when it will come. It could come for any of us tonight. It could come for any of us this week, next week, what have you. There's no guarantee that we have that old age or years beyond this that we could practice. So we can't keep postponing our Dharma practice. Thirdly, even if you don't postpone it and you remember to practice it, you still might do it impurely. And that's where, again, the 8 worldly concerns can often come in, is that we still might be more preoccupied with what we're getting out of our meditation to help us be happier in this life. There are benefits to meditation that we can get in this life. That's not why we meditate. That's not why we engage in Dharma practice. Any form of practice is to get benefits in this life. We do it with much purer motivations. So again, if we don't remember death, we might practice Dharma, but we don't do it very purely. And even if you do practice it purely, number 4, we don't have a continuity to our practice. We don't have the kind of strength of it being able to be a continual dedication to practicing the Dharma to actually change our minds and develop, some progress on the path. And of course, by virtue of all of that, number 5, we'll end up creating a lot of non-virtue. The 8 worldly dharmas are non-virtue. They are engaging in attachment. They are engaging in aversion towards things. And oftentimes we even do things on the basis of not getting what we want and trying to get what we do want in terms of the 8 worldly concerns. And of course, that will cause us to not progress to liberation. So that's one of the reasons why death and impermanence is the very first meditation after having examined our situation of having this good rebirth. We have to see that we should be abandoning all non-virtue and doing whatever we can to progress to liberation and enlightenment. Then the 6th one, you will die with fear and regret. They say that essentially if you practice really well, then by the time you get to the end of this life, you won't have any regrets. You won't be sitting there on your deathbed going, oh my gosh, I haven't used this life well. You see all the faults and all the mistakes you made and all the time you spent preoccupied with worldly affairs. And you get to your death and you go, "Ah, what did I do? I wasted this opportunity." So you won't die with that kind of regret, of course, if you have a strong recollection of impermanence. But without that, we probably will end up wasting this life. We probably will end up doing a lot of things that will have great regret when we're actually on our deathbed or when death faces us in whatever way it will. It's not always in the comfort of a deathbed where we have the luxury to examine our lives. It could happen very quickly. Of course, the benefits are somewhat opposite to those. Your actions become very beneficial, because we become very dedicated to using our life well. And your Dharma practice becomes powerful because we're not going to waste a moment. So we're going to put great energy into whatever it is that we are doing. Again, studying, meditating, practicing day in and day out, all the moments of our day with bodhicitta motivation and so on. Then the next three through five, are the fact that it's great benefit at the beginning of our practice because it kind of spurs us into engaging in the Dharma more wholeheartedly. We'll gain great benefit in the middle of our practice because it sustains your practice and keeps it moving forward. And of course, it doesn't allow you then to, sort of stop. You continue all the way to the end where it becomes the impetus for you to conclude the practice. The practice of gaining a good rebirth, the practice of becoming liberated and enlightened. Death and impermanence is something we do recall throughout all the levels of the path because it is the impetus for us to actually use this life well while we have it by engaging in whatever level of practice that we are doing. And then, of course, the sixth one is the exact opposite of the sixth one that we just saw for the fault. Instead of having regret and being sorrowful at death, we'll actually die with a very peaceful and happy mind. There have been certainly many Dharma practitioners in the FPMT who were around for quite a long time. We've lost a number of them over the last couple of years, who the reports are always like they have these amazingly peaceful deaths. They've practiced the Dharma so well, and they have great confidence in what they have done and in their future existence and the path that they are on, that they can die without, any of that sorrow, any of that, you know, kind of heaviness, because it's very light. They're ready to go on. Mummy Max, who was in Santa Fe. I didn't get to see her before she passed away, but they said she was at incredible kind of peace with herself and with, the lamas and what she had done with her life. And she had dedicated her life to really serving the lamas. So this is what we should be aiming for. Is if you think about any particular moment in your day and you say, am I at peace right now to accept death? If death were to come right now, if a plane were to crash into the building where I am or what have you, am I ready to just know and be confident that I've done everything I can with this life? Again, not to have, we don't have to have this understanding that we years ago were engaging at full throttle level or what have you, and there might be some regret about that initially, but as long as we have made continual progress and we've dedicated our lives to the Dharma, then we should feel good when we get to the end of this life. How do we get to that place of making sure we use this life well? Meditating on death. So let me introduce you to the death awareness meditation, though I'm sure many of you have done it many times. And this text in particular, I love using these verses to meditate on this. So I'm hoping that you'll enjoy going through this tonight, even though it is the topic of death. It's such an important one that you can hopefully feel inspired to use these verses in your meditation. These are what are often called the three root points that are in the death awareness meditation. It's often called the 9-point death awareness meditation because there are three sub-points to each of these three. The first has to do with thinking about the certainty of death, that death is absolutely certain to happen, and it will happen to you. And then thinking about how there's no certainty as to when you will die. And this, of course, is the real kicker. This is the one Lama Tsongkhapa said is so important that we study and meditate on. Because even though we might get that death is certain for us, we have to understand the uncertainty of when death will happen. As I said just a few minutes ago, it could happen tonight. It could happen at any time. And then finally, thinking about how nothing except the Dharma can help at the time of death. All the things we've tended to rely upon are going to abandon us, are not going to be of any use. And the only thing that will matter is the degree to which we have tamed our minds. So, the very first of these, the certainty of death, there's going to be a little introductory verse that we're going to look at in a moment. Then we're going to look at the first of these. Death will definitely come. Nothing can prevent it. And I'll come back to this slide after we've gone through the verses that pertain to that. So let's go to our text and go through what Yeshe Sundru says. Again, I find these really quite inspiring to work with. The introduction to this topic, this first of the three roots, is this excellent basis, always hard to find, and if one finds it, very great in value, is not permanent. It will quickly perish, like a drop of dew on the tip of a grass blade. So, like a blade of grass with a bit of dew in the morning, you might have dew on it. By the time the sun comes up, it's evaporated, it's gone. It's not permanent, meaning unchanging and sort of lasting. It will disappear. Of course, the topic of death and impermanence is part of the larger topic of impermanence that exists with regard to the subtle impermanence of all phenomena that are produced, that arise from causes and conditions. Everything is constantly changing moment by moment, and that's the meaning of impermanence. Whereas permanent, what we cling to is that things aren't changing. We like to even neglect the changes that go on with our bodies, but our bodies are continually changing, right? We don't see it. We're not investigating all the various cells of our bodies, but our bodies are continually going through this process of transformation. There's that statistic about how every 7 years, every single cell in your body has been completely replaced, at least once, some of them numerous times. So we don't even have the same body we had 7 years ago, but we like to think it's the same body. We hold on to a view of permanence that is exactly the opposite of impermanence. The fact that everything that is caused is changing moment by moment. Here we're talking mainly about gross impermanence, though. The fact that we are clinging to this body and this life as if it's going to last forever, as if it's not going to come to some end. Gross impermanence is when things that are produced by causes and conditions cease. And this life will absolutely cease. This body will cease to be inhabited by your consciousness, cease to be considered Don or whoever it is, ourselves in terms of that sort of flesh that is left over, that is going to be cremated or buried or become worm food or whatever. I mean, the idea is that this is absolutely going to happen because the body is not permanent, because this life is not permanent. This is the nature of everything that is produced. And the gross impermanence is something that we need to be cognizant of. Otherwise, again, we are going to end up wasting this life and being kind of ignoring that reality. Okay, so again, this first topic has to do with death is going to definitely come and nothing can prevent it. So verse 178, we've got three verses on this. Whatever kind of body I receive, in happy or woeful destinies in this endless samsara of three realms. The three realms, when we talk that way again, are the desire, the form, and the formless realms. Maybe I'll talk about them more at another point, but we usually talk about the desire realm because this is where the human realm is a subset of those realms in the desire realm. So whatever kind of body we receive, in the end, it does not go beyond the nature of death. All bodies end up dying, right? This is the nature of samsara. Also, whatever sort of place I dwell in, high heavenly spheres on the earth, below in the sea, Mount Meru, a hidden rocky cleft, or elsewhere, I cannot escape this foe, the Lord of Death. So there's no place that we can go to in any realm of samsara where we are going to be able to escape death. Not in former ages of perfection, not now when the five degenerations are spreading, nor in the future is there a time in which there's a chance that the Lord of Death will not oppress me. Actually, I'm sorry, there are more verses to this. I just wanted to share those first three to begin with, though. So I put a little line at the end of that. So again, no matter where we go or what age we live in, you can never escape death as long as you're within samsara. It is said that there are certain ages of the kind of eons of existence, according to Buddhist cosmology, where lives are much longer and where you do have greater length of life to be able to do something. But even with longer lives, I think they say that, kind of human beings start off with like 1,000 years or something, some incredible number. Well, even if you had a life that long, it's still going to come to an end at some point. There's many scientists that are trying to figure out how to reverse the effects of aging and allow people to maintain, vitality for, much, much longer than we currently have. Yeah, but it's not going to be able to get to a place where you can hold on to this life and never have it diminish in quality or what have you. Death will happen. It's just a part of how things come into existence. His Holiness the Dalai Lama emphasizes this frequently. Death happens simply because of birth. Once we have this being coming into existence, it's inevitable that it will go out of existence. So this begins our examination of this. There's a few more verses, as I said, where we can look at um, some additional thoughts that help us to focus on the certainty of death. It says here in verse 181, no means whatever, including Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu, an emperor's mighty armies, a sage's power of truth, inner magical things or mantras or miraculous powers can turn back death. This is kind of a related thought. Not only is it inevitable that death is going to happen for everyone who is born, every being in samsara, there's nothing that can stop it. Even these great kind of gods of the form realm, Brahma and Vishnu, whatever, Shiva, even, a sage's, a Buddha's power of truth. No matter what a Buddha does, a Buddha can't stop death. If a Buddha could stop our death, a Buddha would have stopped our death a long time ago, right? It is the reality that we all face and not being able to be turned away from that reality. So, verse 182, not to be bought off with the ransom of worlds, thrice thousandfold and filled entirely with wealth and riches. In other words, you can't, bribe death into not coming. Say, here, I'll give you all of this money, all these jewels, and therefore I'll avoid having to die. This foe, the Lord of Death, can't be repulsed by medicines prepared by the very King of Doctors. The King of Doctors is the medicine Buddha. And of course, the medicine Buddha has great power as a being we might be able to invoke and receive the blessings of. But the medicine Buddha himself cannot stop our death. Our death is going to happen. Absolutely. Then verse 183, of all beings, high or low, who've appeared in the past, if one checks now, only names remain. Of all the sentient beings living at present, the time will also come when not one's left. Okay, so this is how that meditation is often encouraged to be done, is to actually think about beings of the past who have died. And we can begin with historical figures. Think about Jesus Christ, think about the Buddha, think about all these politicians and world leaders and whoever, artists, writers of the past have all had to succumb to death. Think about the beings that you've known in this life who have already died. Perhaps grandparents, perhaps even parents, maybe even others, friends, people in our circle who have passed away. Then think about the reality that everyone who's in your circle right now is also going to have to die. And then eventually the circle tightens in till where it finally hits home with regard to yourself. Why should you be the exception? I think it's Joan Halifax Roshi in her book, Being with Dying. She talks about a quote from the Mahabharata. I can't remember the name of the person there who says it, but he says, you know what the most wonderful, amazing thing in the world is? Not wonderful, but a kind of most kind of outstanding, amazing thing in the world there is. And the person says, no, what? And he says, you can be in the midst of all people dying around you and still think that it's not going to happen to you. I mean, it is pretty amazing that we have this kind of resistance to opening up to that reality that death is inevitable for every one of us. And every day that we live our lives without that just first step of this meditation, that awareness that death is going to happen, that's already kind of sealing our, our fate. We invariably won't use this life as well as what we should. So this section, this very first point, again, was to help us to get to that conclusion, to understand that it is absolutely certain that it will happen to you. I didn't meant to go back to the slide. Sorry, let me do that real quick, and then we'll kind of get introduced to the second point under this first topic about the certainty of death. A second topic is our lifespan cannot be increased, and instead it decreases continuously. We have about 5 verses to look at in regard to that. This one is where it starts hitting home a little bit more. Perhaps the first meditation, first point, you kind of get and you say, well, okay, yeah, I'm going to die. But because death is this point out there in the future, whenever it's going to happen, and we don't know when, that's the next set of meditations, we are continually getting closer to it. This day, this time we're spending, this precious time, this hour and a half, we are going to be an hour and a half closer to our death than we were before the class started. Tomorrow you will be, another so many hours closer to death. Every day you're one day closer to death. This is kind of this unbelievable thing to think about that kind of gets us to really recognize the reality of death on our own horizon. We're not thinking about this in regard to other people. It is good to relate it to other people to bring it home, but we have to make it come home to ourselves. So, verse 184, nothing is being added to my life. Finish it must, not tarrying an instant. If it's like the example of a burning lamp, where they traditionally would have like butter lamps made out of yak butter, and of course the butter is getting consumed while the lamp is burning. Well, then what chance is there now of remaining without dying? This is an excellent example to use of like a burning lamp or even a candle. That once you light the candle, which is what happens when we start with our birth, it's continually diminishing the wax or the oil of the lamp and burning away. And so eventually it will cease. Verse 185, from one's first appearance in the womb, one travels towards death without interruption, like a stream descending a steep mountain. Is it not mistaken to think I'll remain alive? To negate the reality of death for you when it is continually getting closer. Our time of death is one day closer every single day. And let me take it off here for just a moment. I want to talk about some of the other examples that are used that you may find even more compelling. I like to think about an hourglass, right? We don't know the size of the hourglass or the number of grains of sand, but when your life starts, it's as if there is a volume of sand in the top chamber, and the sand begins coming down through the central hole, grain by grain, grain by grain. Every moment of our life, more grains of sand coming down into the bottom chamber and less in the top chamber. It's kind of like that big hourglass used in The Wizard of Oz, right? Though it's, for our lives, it's much longer than the duration of that time. But we don't know how many grains of sand are there. But the reality is every single moment, another grain of sand is descending down. You have one less moment in existence. Of course, some people even meditate on the fact that with every heartbeat or with every breath, they are one heartbeat, one breath closer to death. This is a way to bring it home too, is just to recall the physicality of this body. Other analogies that are used are like a train that is on its way to its destination, to the end of the line, as we often say. And the end of the line will come eventually. The train will just keep moving until it finally gets to that stopping point. But whatever it is that brings that to mind for you, this is important to recall that not only is it certain you're going to die, but the time of death is getting closer every moment. And I think this is a very powerful part of the meditation. Again, the second set, where we look at the uncertainty of the time of death, is the main meditation. But I think that this one can be very, very useful to making us recognize every day what we have to do. The rest of this section that pertains to this point really does emphasize that kind of, but we shouldn't get caught up in worldly pursuits and sense objects and things, because we are getting closer and closer to death. So verse 186, sorry, a little bit more. If a man or person is being hurriedly led to their place of execution, and on the way someone pays respect with the 5 sense objects, here's something nice to eat. Oh, here's, something delicious to taste and to smell, and here's something that is, wonderful to listen to. And, will that be a source of pleasure for that person? I mean, if you're on your way to being executed, it's kind of funny. They give people who are on death row like whatever they want for their final meal. like that's some comfort. You're from a Buddhist perspective, I mean, why increase your attachment at the last moment before you're going to die? We should be doing the opposite every day in terms of not pursuing these objects of our senses and the delight of them, because they're only a waste of this life, and we are getting closer and closer to our death. Verse 187, when I myself am hastening, as in this example, towards my death, without a moment's pause, should I meet even hundreds of sense pleasures, is this something I should be pleased about? Just what I was just saying, is that really something for us to be kind of clamoring for, is to have more and more sense pleasures in our lives when we are getting closer to our death every moment and we can't plug up the hourglass and keep the grains of sand from coming down, right? It's going to happen without a moment's pause. Verse 188, if in a short time I must leave behind my present home, my relatives and friends, all my possessions, and even this body, and go, why be attached to this present like a dream? If this is the reality that we're going to have to face the separation that occurs at death, the loss of everything in this life, well, then why are we so preoccupied with all of those things? Again, the whole teaching on the 8 worldly concerns does hit home here in terms of, if we see that this is the reality and every day we are closer to our death, what did we do with that day? What did we do with each day of our life? And have we made the right choices in terms of what things we pay attention to? Verse 189, if my years, my months, my days, my hours, like the shadows cast by the setting sun, cannot be permanent, but must go in a moment, what chance have I of not dying soon? This is kind of a general meditation on the fact that if all of time is just continually going, like that hourglass, like the train, like whatever analogy we're using, the stream, the mountain stream, if it's all just continually in motion and never stopping for a moment, well, we're subject to that. Without a doubt, we are subject to that. And we can't even take a break from it. Like I said, you can't plug up the hole in the hourglass and stop the sand for a while. I like to think that maybe that's happening on occasion. I'm going to take a vacation. Well, then I'm going to plug up the grains of sand and go on vacation. Well, you're still aging when you're on vacation. You're still getting closer to your death when you're on vacation. And many people even die on vacation. So don't think that that's some sort of a temporary exit from the whole process. There's no exit from the process within samsara. Okay, so then the third point within this first root of the certainty of death has to do with the fact that what are we doing with this life? Death will certainly come regardless of whether you've made time to practice Dharma or not. Technically, this isn't a reason for the certainty of death, but it's emphasizing that with the certainty of death, death is going to come whether you use this life well or not. And if we get to the end of this life and we actually want to time out, then, we kind of say, well, it'd be nice if maybe death could just be a little bit later so I could now practice. Now I could maybe put my mind into some meditation and study and what have you. It's too late then. So we have to examine, what are we actually doing with our lives? And this is how the meditation for this is usually done, is by really examining the course of a day and how much of our day are we really spending in what we would consider to be Dharma practice. So I'm sorry, let me try to get it here to verse 190, which starts this section. Before until now, my years have just gone by. In the rest of my life, too, the time for practicing Dharma, when sleep and the like don't divert me, is but a moment. So is this a time for activities of leisure? I have to say, I just turned 66 last week. And, I'm sure some of you are older and some of you are a lot younger. But, as you progress and get older and older, this becomes a big concern, right? What am I doing with the hours that I have every day? And we should be thinking about that years ago, and to whatever degree I thought about it and made some decisions in my life about, getting out of the working world, going to learn Dharma in Italy and all these various things. Those are noble and wonderful, but still got a lot of stuff to do to kind of overcome many of my own habitual patterns of attachment and so on. So we have to be continually examining this. What are we doing with the time that we have? Yeah. How are we actually spending it? Now, what do we mean by practicing Dharma? I think this is important because a lot of people think, oh, it's really important that I recite a lot of mantras or I do a lot of this, a lot of that. The most important thing is to practice Dharma by changing our minds, which we can do at any time. Doesn't necessarily involve sitting on a cushion. Meditation does support that process. But essentially, Dharma practice is doing two things. It's reducing and eventually, of course, eliminating the negative states of mind, the anger, the greed, the jealousy, the ignorance, all those things that we want to be rid of. And secondly, increasing, developing all the positive states of mind. That's what the essence of our Dharma practice is. So we don't necessarily look at our lives and say, well, because I'm working, because I'm doing this and doing that, well, I can't practice Dharma. You practice Dharma all day by bringing to mind more positive states of being, by living your life with loving kindness and compassion and patience and generosity and wisdom as much as you can. And that's how we live our lives well. Rinpoche would often emphasize, because again, bodhicitta is the overriding motivation for all the levels of the path, that we live our lives with bodhicitta mindfulness, with actually thinking about bodhicitta. And I've mentioned this before many times. I think it's important that we instill our lives with that very positive motivation so that even when we sit down to eat or go to the toilet or whatever it is that we do it with bodhicitta motivation. We try to change our actions by virtue of changing our minds, creating more positive states of mind. And then if we continually are abiding in the positive states, the tendency for the negative states to arise will lessen. But that's our job. There's that wonderful verse from the 8 verses of Training the Mind. Vigilant, the moment a delusion appears in my mind, endangering myself and others, I shall confront and avert it without delay. That's our job, essentially. The Kadampa Geshe Ben Kongyo said, standing at the door of the afflictions, holding the spear of the antidotes. Other than this, I have no other job. That is what we are trying to do, is continually be attentive to our minds, lessening the negative tendencies, the negative thoughts from arising, and replacing them with the positive ones. That's how we practice Dharma. So don't think with this third point that it means that, oh, well, then how much time did I spend actually on the cushion and how much time did I spend reciting mantras and reading Dharma books and da da da. Those things are important, don't get me wrong. The measure of good Dharma practice is it changing your mind? Mhm. That's what we'll want to have by the time we get to our deathbed, right? Is to feel like we've really worked on changing our minds. We've at least lessened our jealousy and anger and impatience and whatever, all the various things. And to some degree, lessened our ignorance is at the root of all of that through our investigation into the ultimate nature of things. That's what our spiritual practice comes down to. That's what Dharma, practicing the Dharma means. So let's go back to the verses with that understanding. I just wanted to emphasize that because we can't think in terms of, oh, well, Dharma practice means that I should be doing more retreat or doing this or that. Yes, those things are important. But the most important thing in terms of are you practicing Dharma or not is your mind changing? So, verse 191, if moreover I check what fraction of a single day I'm thinking correctly of Dharma, and what portion of my day I'm distracted, then it becomes clear. Thinking in this way too, I have no time to spare. Every day, that is my job. When we get up every day, we should essentially be saying, I am dedicated to working on my mind today, to doing what I can to overcome these negative tendencies and to increase the positive thoughts. And that is going to be my job, essentially. That is your job description as a Buddhist practitioner, regardless of what level you're on. Because even if you're just simply trying to get a good rebirth, you have to do that work too, to avoid doing the actions that are going to lead to an unfavorable rebirth and to create the actions that will result in a good rebirth. So that's the essence of all Dharma practice. Now, what is the conclusion that we come to? We're going to see this in the very next verse, but let's put it on the slide here as well. The conclusion from this first set of meditations, these first 3 points that are under this root, is I must practice Dharma. I have to use this life to practice Dharma. There's no other purpose to this life. Everything else is shallow and insignificant and meaningless, really, in the face of death, in the face of that reality. So we have to practice Dharma. We have to kind of get that through our thick skulls. So let's go to verse 192 and see how our author wraps this up. He says, from these points, these 3 points we looked at, in the end, I'm certain to die, there being no condition that can stop it. If, moreover, I'll die soon, without respite, how can I not strive truly now in the Dharma? We don't get a break from death. It's going to come. It's like those sands in the hourglass, and so are the days of our lives. My mother used to watch that soap opera. Anyway, this is what happens. We're all moving towards death. There's nothing that can stop it. Well, we have to use this life to practice Dharma. You know, there is, no greater use of this life. I'm going to go to the slides again in a moment, but let me introduce this next section. This is the second main point, which, as I introduced earlier, is the real kind of meat of the matter. Thinking about how there's no certainty as to when I shall die. The first point was it's certain you're going to die. Absolutely. But when it's going to happen, who knows? So, verse 193 introduces this. It says, "Not only am I sure to die in the end, there's no certainty that this very day I shall not be deprived of life, my body left in a graveyard, and my mind reach the bardo." The bardo, of course, is the intermediate state between lives. So the consciousness leaves this body and then goes into an intermediate state where the karma is dictating that process and going on to the next existence. But that we're just a breath away from that state, essentially. We don't know when that is going to be our reality, when we are going to cease existing in this body, in this existence, and be off on another journey, heading towards our next existence, going into that existence, it being subject to death, going on to another existence, and so on. But it's uncertain in this life when that whole process is going to take off for us. Many of us think about, certainly the pandemic did point this out, when suddenly that was the reality for so many people, that they were dealing with this, you know, illness that was causing them to have their life threatened. And many of them did lose their lives from COVID, right? And that was not something that most people would have even imagined like a month earlier. We were starting to hear, little rumblings about things going on in China with some sort of a virus and what have you. But there was there was that wasn't in the scope of people's awareness. And even once it hit, most people kind of kept their head in the sand and kept believing that somehow they weren't going to get it, they weren't going to die, what have you. You know, People of all different ages, people of all different levels of vitality succumbed to the virus. It was a very powerful learning experience for those of us who, could put our heads around it and kind of think about this is showing the uncertainty of the time of death, that it could absolutely happen to any of us. And of course, we're going to get into even how the causes is something as small and insignificant seemingly as the virus can cause our death. This is the reality of what we're dealing with here. So let's go to the slide that shows the 3 points for this, thinking about how there's no certainty as to when I shall die. We went through the introductory verse. The first one is that the lifespan of beings in this world isn't fixed. There are actually said to be some realms of human existence where it is fixed. I think in one it's fixed at like 500 years, another at 1,000. And I think the third one might be even less, like 250 years or something. But in this world, what we call Jambudvipa in the Sanskrit mythology and what have you, in this world, it isn't fixed, right? We like to rely upon the idea of what is an average life for males in America and females in America and all these various statistics that are out there. But that's not even guaranteed, right? There's nothing fixed about that. That's an average. Then we're going to look at the fact that there are more factors that are conducive to death actually than to life. We have to kind of put a lot of attention into staying alive in this world. And actually, a lot of things can cause our death. Maybe that sounds a little scary, but nonetheless, we want to kind of be aware of the reality that death is kind of right around the corner and could happen at any time. And then finally, to recognize our bodies are extremely fragile, which, as I said, I think is something that we did see, certainly with regard to the COVID pandemic, that even people who were of amazing health, athletes and people that, spent their life dedicated to strengthening their bodies to become very resilient, succumbed to something that was really quite, again, seemingly insignificant, but was deadly. So let's take a look at the first of these. Again, that has to do with the lifespan not being fixed. And this is verses 194 and 195. Of yore lived sages with lifetimes of countless years. One day the maximum life will be 10 years. Now there's no fixed order of old and young. What is certain now about lifetime in Jambudvipa? Again, this is also pointing to the fact that even within Jambudvipa, there's said to be cycles of lifespans where there are much longer lives, like I mentioned earlier, where people might think that they could live for a very, very long time. But now we're at the point where what is an average life? 70 something for men, and I think around 80 for women or something. This is again, and I don't know what the actual statistics are right now. But regardless of that, there's no fixed order of old and young. Young people die before old people all the time. Many people lose their children before they pass away. Verse 195, I am here in the morning, gone in the afternoon, or here at bedtime, gone when it's time to get up. Now I exist, and now I don't exist. This way that life's impermanent is indeed frightening. Because again, it's not like we all live to one particular age and then we all kind of look at this horizon of a life and say, okay, at 80, 85, whatever, we're all going to die. Death can happen at any time. And a very powerful way to bring this home, though it might, I would want you to be careful in doing this because if you do this, looking at obituaries is what I was going to suggest. If you can go to an online site or to the newspaper or whatever and look at the obituaries every day. Invariably, yes, there'll be a lot of them that are in the older brackets, right? Because they lived a pretty full life and they're probably, again, going to be succumbing to illness and other things much more readily than others. But nonetheless, you will see within that kind of column of obituaries some people dying at very, very young ages, some people dying in middle years, some people dying, in between those. And of course, we know that there are infants who die and people who die at all different ages. We don't have to be kind of convinced of this, but we don't think about that reality. We should be, again, very happy that every day when we get up, we haven't died that night, that we weren't there in the evening and not there in the morning. Rinpoche would always say that we should like wake up every morning and be just delighted that we have another day of this human life. But the very first thought that we should have after that is today could be the day. He even would go so far, Rinpoche would say, you should think, I will die today. Not like you're making an affirmation. I mean, I know those affirmations are very popular many years ago. I will die today. I will die today. I will die, so that you then die. That's not the point. The point is that if you think that this is your very last day in this life, what will you do with it? Stephen Levine wrote a book called 1 Year to Live. Well, what about 1 day to live? If you wake up every day and you think, oh, good, I didn't die last night. I've got 1 day. I could die tonight. And if you even think strongly like I will die tonight, this will be my last day in this human existence that I have as Don, as whoever. Well, then what will you do with this day? Do you want to die, you know, partying all day or doing something, that is really quite meaningless in the grand scope of things? Or do you want to do something more meaningful and purposeful with this day that you have? Every day, if you live your life like that, then it won't matter what time death comes, whether it comes when you're in middle age, when it comes when you're quite old age or very elderly. It won't matter because every day you will have used extremely well. And the day that death comes, you'll actually be quite prepared because you'll say, oh, I've been thinking this way that death is going to come every day, and now it finally is here. We've been doing the opposite though, right? We've been thinking every day that death's not going to come, and we've been lucky in that every day we have not died. We're still here. Lucky is not quite the right word. We've been fortunate. We don't have the karma yet for this life to end. But what day is it going to end? We don't know. So again, this is what we're trying to drive home with this meditation, is the fact that it is absolutely uncertain when death is going to show up on your doorstep. Again, then we have that the fact that there are more factors conducive to death than life. We have about 5 verses to look at in regard to that. Let's go back to our text and do those verses. Verse 196. This is where we first start. We start this whole section by looking at external causes of our death. I might collide with something, fall over a cliff. My boat might capsize. We might say our car might be in an accident. It's more common than a boat these days. I might be burned by fire, right? house fires happen all the time. My house could even collapse. I might be thrown from a horse. My body and limbs can be broken or wounded by weapons, harmed by enemies, human or non-human, disease. Okay, so that's kind of where we stop there with the external causes. I mean, you could kind of make up your own as well as you go through this. And again, perhaps when you're reading obituaries, they don't often say, well, what people died of, but we hear about things in our world, right? People who die from various physical things, external factors. We look at the tornadoes that have been going through parts of the country, right? That are just leaving a wake of dead people behind them, as well as, of course, all the property damage and things that has happened. Those are realities of the world that we live in. Certainly with climate change, natural disasters are much, much more common. And any of us can be subject to those. We might think, oh, I live in this particular place and we don't usually get this. But the way things are going with weather, we could have that reality at any time. So there are those factors that are external to us that can become the cause of our death. Let's go on then to look at the things that are more internal that can happen within these bodies that we have that can bring about our death. And that starts with the second line of verse 197. Diseases of 404 varieties, 80,000 kinds of evil spirits. Such outer and inner conditions for death are many. Now, there's not many mentioned here in regard to inner, but we know by our awareness of the various maladies that can happen in this world, cancer and kind of failure within our other organs, lungs, heart, what have you, all of these various things can occur, right? We can have internal factors within our bodies that can be the cause of our death. And many people die this way, where their bodies fail them, even at, again, young ages, where suddenly they're dealing with quite threatening situations. I might mention someone who I met at the Kadampa Center in Raleigh when I was there the last time, who has a daughter who developed an autoimmune disease. I don't remember the name of it, but essentially she got to the place where she had three foods that she could eat. That was it. Everything else was toxic for her and caused her to have unbelievable problems and pain and what have you. Three things she could eat. I think she's had some luck in a treatment for this. But the reality is this can happen to any of us, that our bodies can suddenly, from the inside, develop conditions that could be the cause of our death. Of course, cancer being one of the most common ones that we see in our world, right? The last way that we also look at some conditions is, besides outer and inner, is the fact that even the things that we take to sustain this life can sometimes turn against us. This is the next two verses. It's a growth time for the 5D generations. I'll mention what those are in a moment. So ways of extending life are hard to practice, as the power of external medicines is also failing. Therefore, conditions for staying alive are few. Food can be unwholesome and turn into poison. Medicine can fail and become a cause of disease. Thus, even conditions for living become death's causes. How can one trust in conditions for living here? This idea of the 5 degenerations was actually mentioned in one of the earlier verses. It said that, and this is not just looking at like the 21st century, this is looking at this whole eon that we are in. As was mentioned in one of the earlier verses, you had human beings with these very, very long lives, and everything was quite wholesome, and they were able to sustain their lives much better. We've degenerated from those times. There are said to be 5 ways that we've degenerated in terms of degeneration of afflictions, degeneration of lifespan, degeneration of our bodies, even degeneration of resources and things that it's usually called time, meaning that things take longer to come to maturation and produce food and what have you, and are not as healthy as they were in these previous eons. And then the 5th generation, can't remember that one, but essentially we are working with this idea that what we are living in now is a time where resources are not that reliable, you know, and of course this is related to some degree to cancer too, right? That many of the things that we eat, based on the way that they are farmed and produced, and pesticides and various things, become the dangerous for our bodies. We can actually have things that we're taking to sustain our lives that become the cause of us ending our lives. And this can happen. I remember a few years back, probably some of you remember it too, and this does happen quite occasionally, when there was organic spinach from California that was tainted with E. coli, right? And so people like to eat organic thinking, oh, I'm going to really take good care of my body and not have all those pesticides and whatever. But even organic food can be infected with various agents, right? So some of the things we take to sustain our lives can become the cause of our ruin and become the cause of our death. So outer, inner, and even other conditions of things that we take to sustain our lives can become a problem. The last of the 3 points in regard to this is verse 2. I'm sorry. Um, Okay, well, I'm sorry, there's one more here that has to do with kind of a conclusion to that second point. Again, life is like the guttering flame of a lamp in the wind of all the varied conditions for death. To have plans as if my life could last forever is grasping at permanence. Certainly it will finish. So again, we've examined all those various conditions and causes that can bring about death. We should get over think this idea that we're going to somehow be able to avoid death. Death could happen again at any particular time. We're like a candle in the wind. This is a phrase we've come to know in our culture, but actually Nagarjuna in one of his texts talks about the flame of a lamp, the flame of a butter lamp that is subject to the wind that could extinguish it at any moment. Now we go to the third point. I'm sorry. This is where we have the final 3 verses pertaining to that third point about the life, our lives and bodies actually being very, very fragile. This human life and body of mine are like the example of a bubble in the water. This is another one, a water bubble besides the candle. Even a tiny cause destroys it. So harboring hopes of long life is most mistaken, because actually, again, this life can be brought down very, very quickly. Even collections very hard to destroy, like the Earth, Mount Meru, this mythical mountain that's at the center of the universe, the phenomenal universe. The 4 continents, Jambudvipa, again, which is what we refer to Earth as often, is one of these 4, and the ocean will all be destroyed. So, what certainty is there that this body, like a clay pitcher, won't perish right now? So, this delusion that we're living about thinking that, yeah, we're going to be just fine and just continue to live this life till a ripe old age. If we see that even in our world, things come to a crashing halt very quickly, well, this body's no different, quite fragile. Though today I am well and free from sickness, since this foe, the Lord of Death, will come all at once, unsuspected, like a cloud in the sky, there is no time for staying in mental ease. So that's the last verse that is kind of talking to that third point within the uncertainty of the time of death. And again, there's no fixed lifespan, that there are many causes of death, and that actually this body's pretty fragile. We like to think we're really resilient, and especially young people who have a lot of vitality and who've, exercised frequently and what have you. But as I pointed out in the pandemic, they weren't exempt. Many young people died. This was, horrific illness that came into our space of being and had to contend with that reality, and many people lost their lives from it. We need to get that message and not just, yes, mourn the people that lost their lives and what have you, but get the message. It's all around us all the time. Again, why do we think it's not going to happen to us? And why do we also think that it's not even going to happen today? So, what is the message we take away from meditating on those 3 subpoints about the uncertainty of the time of death? Not only must I practice Dharma, which was the first conclusion, the conclusion here is I must practice it now or quickly. I can't waste a moment because death could come tonight. Are we ready to die? Seriously, are we ready to die? you know, I mentioned that earlier. Just think about it momentarily throughout your day. Am I ready to die right now? If I'm walking on the street somewhere and there's a lot of traffic, am I ready for a car to come careening out of control by somebody who's had a heart attack at the wheel or something and crash into me and bring my life to an end? It can happen. It happens. You can't deny that death does happen sometimes in this very haphazard way. So it can happen to you that way. What's to stop it? So, verse 204 is where we get the conclusion from Yeshe Sundaru in Essential Nectar. He says, as I have no news of which is coming first, the hour when tomorrow dawns, or the body and mind of the intermediate state of my next existence, is it not worthwhile to practice the Dharma quickly, to take advantage of what I do have, which is just this present moment? There's no guarantee of anything beyond this. I'm going to cover the last part of it rather quickly because I think it's the easier part of the meditation to some degree, but it's kind of looking at the three things that we tend to rely upon in our lives and come to see that they're completely unreliable at the time of death. And the only thing that will be reliable is the Dharma. So the first of these three things that we tend to rely upon a lot are our friends and relatives. And there's again just a single verse for each of these three. It might be nice to have them gathered around to support you to some degree, but you die alone. You don't take any of them with you, and they can't be of any real help to you once you've left this life. B, the wealth and possessions that you have, all the resources you gain, all the money in the bank, all the stocks and whatever it is that you have in your financial portfolio, that can't benefit you at all. You don't take a single penny with you. And then C, the third one, even your own body that you have relied upon so much in this life and really developed a lot of attachment towards can't benefit. You're going to have to leave it behind. And of course, the conclusion is not only must we practice it quickly, we also have to practice it purely, meaning with no real worldly motivation and really directed towards attaining the greatest spiritual goals, with that pure and concentrated intention and focus. So let's look at the verses that pertain to this. Verse 205, when I am seized by that foe, the Lord of death, even if all beings of the three realms of existence who are my friends and relatives surround me, I'm powerless to take with me a single one, right? Nobody goes with you. You die alone. You came into this world alone, essentially, conceived alone, and you've relied upon many people throughout this life, but they can't do anything for you when you're going to die. Can't go with you, can't hold your hand, can't be there as any sort of support. Verse 206, our resources. Even though I owned thrice thousandfold worlds, all filled to the brim with the seven precious things, of all that wealth, I'd have no means to take to my next existence, even a sesame seed. He doesn't talk about a penny, he talks about a sesame seed. You can't even take a sesame seed with you, boy. That's kind of small, right? Not even a little grain, nothing goes with you. They often talk about how you're like a hair pulled out of butter, that all the butter is left behind and all the stuff we had, the hair just goes on, the consciousness goes on to its next existence. Doesn't take anything with you. And of course, resources might help you at the time of death to be a little more comfortable, to have the care that you need as you're moving into death. If you have that fortune of dying in your bed and being cared for in that way. But that's it. I mean, you can't take anything with you, right? Verse 207, pertaining to this body, even this body, together with which I was born, is left behind on my bed and bedding, while by the wind of good and bad karma, my mind is carried to its unique place within the six realms of existence. This is what is going to happen, is that essentially, and sometimes they even talk about in this section on death, the death process. But what happens at death is that your consciousness leaves this body. And one teacher says that, this body that you've relied upon your whole life, the one time you really need it, it lets you down. It just is left there as this corpse. Essentially, we are walking corpses, just that there's consciousness still together with it. Once the consciousness leaves, it's a corpse. It's a, non uh, uh, animated and pound of flesh or pounds of flesh. It's essentially not going to be of any benefit to anyone. It's just you've left it behind. The consciousness has gone on. So, again, all three of these things, which tend to be what we rely upon in this life, friends, people that we're quite close to, our resources, our bodies, they're all going to let you down. You can't, in the end, take any of them with you. So, what is the conclusion again? We saw it earlier on the slide. There are two verses pertaining to this. Consequently, at the hour of death, body, possessions, and friends no longer help. What is useful at that time is only the holy Dharma, the infallible refuge. Therefore, I must now turn my back upon dreamlike, worthless activities of this life, and through the Lam Rim, essence of the Dharma, strive for the glorious state of enlightenment. Please inspire me so that I can do this. And this is kind of where we end up with in this meditation, is if we do this well and we examine all three root points through each of their three subpoints, we should come to that conclusion. Like, there's no time to waste. No time to lose, as they often say. This is the predicament that we find ourselves in. But the answer is to practice the Dharma. How else will we make sure that when we get to our time of death, that we've used this life well? So before we conclude tonight, and I'll see if there are questions in a moment, but I wanted to share one little quote from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I think, yeah, from Wholesome Fear, a book about death and dying that was published some years back, his teachings on that. He says, without remembering death and impermanence, we may imagine we will live forever. We may imagine we don't have to prepare for death, or we may think that the only purpose in life is to enjoy ourselves as much as possible. Then, with such attitudes, we may become careless and fail to do what is really important with our lives. So let this, going through this tonight be a lesson in making sure we do put proper attention to what is important. A measure of whether we're doing that is look at your life right now. To what degree do you put energy into the things of this life that are preoccupied with having the comforts, the luxuries, whatever it is that you enjoy in this life? Is it the same, or is it more than, or is it less than the amount of tension you put into the Dharma, into working with your mind, into practicing Dharma throughout your day, studying the Dharma, meditating, what have you? All of those things combined, are you putting as much attention into that as you are into your worldly affairs? You know, if you aren't, if your worldly affairs are taking more of your time, energy, what have you, attention, well, then this is the meditation for you. This is what we really need to be working on, is understanding that death is going to come, not sure when, and it will be important, absolutely, to what degree you practice the Dharma, because that is what you take with you forward. Again, we do become kind of carriers of our past karma, the things that we have created. If all we've created is more attachment to our lives and non-virtue by way of trying to accumulate all these things and what have you, well, then it's inevitable that we're going to move into the next life with that unfortunate karma dictating what happens. And that's what we're going to look at in the next week, is the unfortunate states we could end up in if we don't attend to all of this, if we don't reverse what we are doing and put more energy and attention into virtue and practicing the Dharma. So any questions from tonight? Got a few minutes before the conclusion of class. Or comments, if anyone wants to comment on their experience with this meditation. As I said, most of you know Long Rim and have worked at least with this meditation because it's a very powerful one. Anyone? Another book that I might steer you towards, it's not in our tradition. It's actually written by Larry Rosenberg, who's part of the Insight Meditation Society, the kind of Vipassana Insight folks and what have you. He's a wonderful teacher, and he wrote a book called Living in the Light of Death. And he actually examines these 9 points from his own kind of personal way. For example, he says he's a fan of watching old movies, like black and white films of all these things that were produced in what the 30s and 40s and whatever. I mean, not so many black and white films these days, right? But it came to him one night when he was watching one of these old films. All the actors that he was seeing on the screen were seemed so alive and had such vitality. Not a one of them is remaining, right? And of course, all the people, when the credits come up, all the people that were involved in producing the film and the lighting folks and the best boy and the blah, 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 blah. I mean, all these various terms that for people who are, playing a role in creating that film, they're all gone as well, right? Of the people who are gathered here right now in this, Zoom room where we are having the teachings, as well as anyone watching it probably in, the future, of the people that you are gathered with, how many of them will be around in 50 years? In 100 years, they're all going to be gone without a doubt, right? I mean, very few people are going to live to 130, 140 or something. I don't know that it even happens in our world, right? So we have to get this. It's going to happen to us. And of course, some people die quite quickly. Mhm. It's no warning, death can come. And suddenly we are facing that reality. So again, are we prepared? Have we done what we need to do with this life? Very important meditation. Again, it's a sobering up kind of meditation. It's not something, if you're in a kind of depressed, sad mood, to do this meditation, because it might actually make you a little more depressed. But the impetus behind doing it is to actually take hold of our lives and to really make sure we do what we have to do while we are here. Because again, there's no guarantee that we're even going to be here another day. So if there are no other questions or comments, then let's do our dedication. And I would encourage you, again, to work with these verses if you can over the next week, as I work with some of them here in my retreat. And they're really powerful ways of kind of summarizing the main points to look at in regard to this death awareness meditation. Um, let's do our dedication prayers and make sure, again, with all the might and energy that we have, to look back on everything that we've created, all the virtue, all the positive things that we've done, especially by being here tonight and examining this very important topic. As Rinpoche says, something that, it's not beginners and not meaningless. We have to actually really grasp the importance of this topic. All these seeds we planted, we are dedicating for our own enlightenment and for the enlightenment of all beings. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then, because bodhicitta is the key, it is the linchpin behind all of this, we want to make sure that our motivation of bodhicitta continues to grow and develop so it pervades all of our thoughts and that it doesn't decline in the least. We make that strong aspiration by reciting this prayer together. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then we'll do the prayer for His Holiness's long life, that is about seeking His holy wishes to be fulfilled. As we recite this, we think that also all of our other gurus who are with us, all the other teachers, whether we have a connection with them or not, all these amazing beings who are here to help us, we want them to abide in this world for a very long time with good health so we can benefit from their presence in this world. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then we make strong prayers for the very swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Again, just over a year since he passed. And we want to make sure that we're creating the causes from our side to have him be back in this world, to continue to guide us in a new form with kind of a new name, a new being, but the same kind of pure essence to be here to help us and others on our path to enlightenment. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's, got to move my little thing up here. Sorry, I'm not able to see that. Okay. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from mother living beings you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And lastly, let's bring to mind all those beings who we're holding in our hearts. Every one of us knows individuals, people, animals, what have you, who are dealing with difficulty in their lives right now, maybe even some obstacles to their well-being, dealing with illness, perhaps even those we know who have died or who are dying. Send this positive energy out to them and share it without holding any back. This is how we increase our merit even, is by giving it away to others, thinking that it becomes the cause to remove the suffering of these beings immediately and to help them to have all the causes of well-being and happiness this moment. And may this happen for all beings through the force of what we've done here together tonight. Thank you all for the opportunity to teach on this subject tonight, especially because I said this is quite an important one. Lama Zopa Rinpoche emphasizes this in many of his teachings. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to watch any of these teachings. The video, there's a transcript that goes with it. You can kind of follow along on the transcript and hear Rinpoche do these thought transformation teachings, essentially is what they are. But it's all about Lam Rim and all about how to use what is going on. And of course, at that time, it was the pandemic when he was doing these teachings to make sure that we get lessons from what is happening in our world, and of course, increase our compassion for others and all that as well, but use it as an impetus for us to see our own mortality and the fact that we can die at any moment. Yeah, Bill, please.
I just want to let folks know that if you're in Missoula, we're going to be focusing on this next Monday. So if you'd like to come and join us and maybe have some discussion around this topic, which has recently become important to me. Uh,
Okay.
so just wanted to let people know that. I mean, I know some of us are regulars on that here, but
Mhm.
just that's what we'll be doing this coming week.
Great, Bill. Thank you for sharing that. No, I think it's really good if you're doing Monday meditations every week, right? If they can be what we were discussing here, and using some of the verses.
We
I
have
know,
been.
yeah, that's great.
We did
That's
eight
perfect.
versions of thought transformation last week,
Mhm.
but I didn't want to do this meditation until we'd had teachings on it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
uh, we're going to do it this next week. So
Great.
we can,
Perfect. You're pleasing me by doing that. That's the best way to kind of review and work with these, and in a group meditation, very powerful. So yeah, please, if you can attend, be a part of that. Great. Thank you, Bill and Colleen. And thank you all for being here and taking part in this and supporting the Dharma through OSL. And I will see you all next Tuesday. Okay, be well. Thank you.
Thank you.